past, so if you want to take us live then, Michael. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. I'm Jason Brock, the chair of the Policy Committee and leader of the council. I want to welcome you to the Policy Committee tonight, which is being held again as an online meeting. Prior to the public part of our meeting this evening, members of the committee met in private to consider confidential matters in relation to item 10, which is Greenwich Leisure Limited financial support. When the committee considers this report later on this evening, councillors will be taking the confidential information we have received into account in our final decision on the item. As with previous meetings, for clarity, I will ask members individually at the end of any debate on each and every report to state if they are for, against, or wish to abstain from the recommendation before them at this stage. Where a report simply seeks to note minutes or something to that effect, I'll just instead seek a general assent. I will shortly ask members to introduce themselves for the benefit of the public and to ensure that everybody is in attendance as expected. Could I remind members and officers to put their microphones on mute when you are not speaking. When you're called to speak, you should unmute your microphone and pause for around 3 seconds to allow for the slight time delay in connection. You must also remember to put your camera on before being called to speak, otherwise you will not be visible on the screen during your contribution. As ever, we're at the mercy of individual broadband connections, but so long as we have 3 members still in the meeting, we will be quorate. So now for the roll call of councillors. I'll call your name and if you can introduce yourself and any position that you hold. So as I've said earlier, I'm Jason Brock, chair of the Policy Committee, leader of the council, and I'll call on the other members alphabetically. Councillor Devine.
Hi, I'm Ricky Devine, Tilehurst councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Emberson.
Hi, I'm Councillor Ellie Emerson and I'm the lead member for Corporate and Consumer Services.
Councillor Ennis.
Councillor John Ennis, lead councillor for housing. Thank you.
Councillor Hoskin.
Hi, I'm Graham Hoskin. I'm lead councillor for health, wellbeing and sport. Thanks.
Councillor Page.
Councillor Tony Page, lead member for environment planning and transport and deputy leader of the council.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Stanford Beale, Peppard Ward Councillor. I'm deputy leader of the opposition and I'm deputising for Councillor Skeets, who's unable to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Good evening, David Stevens, councillor for Thames Ward and also chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee.
Councillor Terry.
Hello, Councillor Terry, lead member for Children's Services.
And Councillor White.
Evening everyone, Councillor Rob White, leader of the Green Group of Councillors and Park Ward Councillor.
Thank you, councillors. I'd also like to introduce the officers who are in attendance tonight. As ever, they won't be on the screen as much as councillors, but it's right that everybody knows who they are and what their role is. So Mike Graham is our Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services and the Monitoring Officer. Shona Douglas is the Executive Director of Adult Care and Health Services. Peter Robinson is the Interim Assistant Director of Finance. Stuart Donnelly is the Financial Planning and Strategy Manager. Jackie Yates is our Executive Director of Resources and the Chief Financial Officer. Francis Martin is our Executive Director of Economic Growth and Neighbourhood Services. Nick Burston is Head of Housing Property Services, and Donna Pentelo is the Assistant Director of Culture. Right, moves us on then to item 5, declarations of interest. I have not been notified of any interest to be declared, but if anybody has any, please do say so now. Excellent. We move on then to the minutes of the previous meeting. Members, can you confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of August 2020 are correct?
Agreed.
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 Brilliant. Thank you all. This takes us on then to public questions. And the first question is from Tom Lake, and it is about the transfer of Royal Berkshire Healthcare Trust services to Townlands Hospital in Henley. Mr. Lake, if you could press *6 on your handset to unmute yourself and then ask the question as you are ready.
Hello. Royal Berkshire Hospital Trust announced with a few weeks' notice that 3 departments, audiology, ENT and plastic surgery, would move their outpatient clinics to Townlands Memorial Hospital in Henley-on-Thames, outside the area of our Berkshire West Clinical Commissioning Group, with a residual unit in Reading for those who don't want to travel. They've stated they would be working with local authorities to provide improved public transport to Henley. The Reading bus is currently 11 minutes normal walk from Townlands. The background to this is that Oxford Clinical Commissioning Group took out a 25-year build, lease and maintain contract with Amber Solutions for Care Limited for a building containing room for an 18-bed rehabilitation ward and a 12-bed palliative care unit, neither of which were eventually actually to be used, despite fierce opposition from the residents of Henley-on-Thames. The upper floor of the facility, it's not actually a hospital now, has presumably been empty since the opening in 2017. Surely the public of Berkshire West should have modern facilities in its own area. The NHS Constitution gives the public the right to be consulted directly or through their representatives on plan developments. So A, has the Reading Borough Council been consulted well in advance of this move? If so, when and how? What are the employment effects, especially for support staff, of the move of these 3 departments out of Reading? And C, what are the anticipated costs of the improved public transport service to Henley-on-Thames? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Councillor Hoskin to respond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lake, for your important question. The Leader of the Council, Councillor Jason Brock, the Deputy Leader of the Council, Councillor Tony Page, and I were able to meet the Acting Chief Executive of the RBH, Nikki Lloyd, on Friday, the 21st of August, to seek reassurances on the matters that you raise. As the proposal is, at this point, for a temporary and partial relocation of services to the Townland site in Henley, and it is expected that patients wishing to continue to attend the clinic at the RBH will be able to do so. It was not considered by the Hospital Trust that a full public consultation was necessary. The Trust, though, did want to engage with partners and patients on the matter, and the Council did receive a letter from the Trust in early March. Ms. Lloyd was able to expand upon the rationale for this move. The current location of these departments in the West Drive area of the hospital site are out of date, inadequate and long overdue for modernisation. Furthermore, there are particular problems of re-establishing the service in the existing facilities with the current COVID-19 precautions required. The combination of the clinics performing what are considered to be aerosol generating procedures, that's aerosol from your own from patients' mouths, meaning a full air change is required between appointments, together with the constrained size of the buildings, means that capacity would be reduced to 1 appointment per hour. At Townlands, that timescale is reduced to 15 to 20 minutes, meaning that 3 to 4 times as many patients can be seen. These considerations are even more important considering the backlog that has built up as a result of the pandemic. In our meeting with Ms. Lloyd, we were very keen to receive assurances that there would be adequate capacity with the remaining clinic at the RBH to ensure that those who would prefer to be seen in Reading are able to do so. The hospital's view is that a combination of expanded use of remote appointments together with an analysis of where patients who use this service live means that they are confident that they will be able to accommodate all who want to be seen at the RBH. Another matter that we sought reassurance on is that a permanent decision on the location of these services has not yet been made. The RBH has a 12-month lease on the part of the Townland building that it will be using. Over this time, there will be further evaluation and engagement on whether this should become a permanent move. We will press for a full and meaningful public consultation to take place before a permanent decision is made. We will also be keeping a close eye on the matter to ensure that the assurances around the capacity of the RBH clinic to meet demand are met. Regarding your question about impacts on employment, it should be borne in mind that the plan is for some of the outpatient clinics, as opposed to the whole department, to be temporarily moved to the Townsland site. We're not cited on the full detail of the staffing structures and arrangements for this proposal, and any arrangements for staff to work from alternative sites will be undertaken in line with their NHS employment arrangements and contracts. However, the RBH have confirmed that this change will not lead to any redundancies, and travel time to the Townsland site has been factored into staff work plans. As to your question about the cost for public transport links, we're also pleased to hear that the RBH are in discussion with Reading Buses about transport provision to make visiting Townlands in Henley easier for patients, and we will continue to press for further details of their plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. Mr. Lake, do you have a supplementary question?
Well, I do. Since putting down the question, a couple of patients have told me that in their experience, parking and access to Townland's already difficult without the new departments having moved in. So it may be necessary to readjust this further. With retail and office demand for space falling back in the town for reasons of technological change speeded up by the COVID pandemic, isn't there an opportunity for more of these health facilities to come into town centres where public transport, parking and refreshments are available? Could Reading Borough Council suggest this to the Royal Berks Trust and other healthcare providers, and perhaps assist them in exploring this possibility?
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Tenuous in terms of being a valid supplementary, but you did mention in your initial question that is what you would ask. So, Councillor Hoskin.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the parking and transport, clearly, as I said before, we'll be pressing to see what proposals they have in terms of transport from Reading to Henley for patients. Some thoughts are already going on in terms of the size of bus of vehicle might be required. So clearly those plans will be vital in terms of people who may have trouble being able to park there. And I suppose the advantage of this being for a 12-month period is that some of those issues that you talk about, Mr. Lake, can be worked through. And we can also see, of course, that the location of Reading, the clinic there, has the capacity. So some of those things can be worked through in the meantime for full public consultation. In terms of your wider point, I suppose it's particularly relevant to the hospitals developing ideas around the redevelopment of the site. There's a consultation open at the moment in terms of some of the broad ideas and broad themes of what they want to do. And over the coming months and years, as further detailed proposals come along, and then I think, you know, the ideas that you have in terms of where services are is important. It also feeds into the council's response to the plans that the hospital has in terms of services where possible being close to home in order to promote independence and sustainability of the service. So all of those things I think fit together, but particularly in terms of services close to communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. Thank you, Mr. Lake. I will now remove you from the meeting. You're of course welcome to watch the remainder of tonight's proceedings online, or you could go and do something else, entirely up to you. But thank you very much for your time, Mr. Lake.
Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us on to public question 2, which is from Jan Tralick to myself, and it's about pension investments. So Mr. Tralick, if you could press *6 on your handset, this will unmute you and then ask you a question when you're ready.
Hello, good evening.
Hello,
everyone.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. My question, I understand that the Local Pensions Partnership, LPP, of which the Berkshire Pension Fund, BPF, is a part, has developed a responsible investing dashboard so that we can easily review what percentage of the fund is vested in fossil fuel extractive industries, among other things. When will the results of this dashboard be published and made available for public scrutiny? The next meeting of the BPF is on 21st of September. Would Councillor Lovelock, RBC's representative on the committee, be willing to ask a question about this at the meeting and report back with an answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trallick, for your question. The Royal Berkshire Pension Fund is administered by the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead and not by Reading Borough Council. Council officers are happy to pursue a response and forward this to you, but staff at the Royal Borough were unable to provide a response by today and are awaiting, as I understand things, further information from LPP. Alternatively, you may wish to consider asking the question directly to Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead Council in their capacity as the administering authority. Having spoken with Councillor Lovelock, she's perfectly happy to ask the question. I should point out that she's not a member of the Berkshire Pension Fund panel. She's a member of the Berkshire Pension Fund Advisory Panel and is therefore a non-voting member. Mr. Trallick, do you have a supplementary question?
I would like you to expedite the process and urge any council officers, including Councillor Lovelock, to act as fast as possible. I feel that RBC are dragging their heels on this, given that
Mr. Trallick, do you have a supplementary question? It's not an opportunity, I'm afraid, to make a further statement.
Yes, I'd like to know if there's any timescale on this by which there'd be a reply, by which the knowledge I seek would be made publicly available.
Mr. Trallick, I can't give an answer on behalf of the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, I'm afraid. You'd be better asking that question directly to the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, who are the administering authority for the pension fund, rather than Reading Borough Council. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Mr. Trallick. I will remove you from the meeting. You're very welcome to listen to the rest of it online if you so choose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Right, this moves us on then to questions from councillors, and we've had two questions this evening, both from Councillor White. The first is to the lead councillor for housing. So, Councillor White, can you ask a question, please?
Certainly. This question is on insulating homes in Reading. 7,290 of our Reading households live in fuel poverty. This is where people in our communities don't have enough money to heat their home. In some parts of the town, it is as high as 30% of households. My Green Party colleagues and I are very concerned about this, as I'm sure you are, Chair. Insulating homes is a great way to bring down fuel bills, cut carbon emissions and create jobs. Most council homes have decent levels of insulation. The problem is most severe in the private sector. What plans are there to insulate more homes in Reading, especially in the private sector, ready for the coming winter?
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Ennis to respond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor White, for your question. The Council recognises the issues related to fuel poverty and the impact on households. Each time the Winter Watch officer visits to assist a vulnerable household struggling in fuel poverty, he will consider a variety of ways to help the residents stay safe and warm. The first is to install basic energy efficient measures to help maximise the levels of heating throughout the dwelling and provide easy to follow advice and guidance to getting the most from their energy. This includes installing radiator reflectors on radiators, on outside walls and draft proofing around windows and doors to help reduce unnecessary heat loss. He will also discuss cheaper ways to pay for energy and the importance of switching to cheaper tariffs and applying for the £140 warm homes discount payment. The other is to review the amount and loft and cavity wall insulation installed and to assess whether the household would qualify for the eco scheme. To qualify, the resident must own or rent the property and be on means tested benefits, i.e. universal credit, tax credits or child benefit. If the household does qualify, then their details are passed on to a green energy company to carry out further assessments and arrange for the installations to be carried out. With larger scale works such as replacement boilers, the private sector housing team excuse me, will look to provide grant assistance to ensure vulnerable families have heating and hot water. In the private rented sector, landlords and agents have been provided with information on the Minimum Energy Efficiency Scheme, MEES, as part of the private sector housing team's landlord focus newsletter. A large percentage of the properties in the private sector, rented sector, visited by both the Winter Watch scheme and the private sector housing team have already made use of the eco funding for loft and cavity insulation. The important work will continue alongside which the Winter Watch scheme, and the private sector housing team and rent guaranteed schemes will promote government-backed schemes to help increase energy efficient levels on older dwellings across the borough. This year, the council will be applying to the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme to add capacity to the Winter Watch scheme, but also to focus on some other property upgrade schemes, which will help to tackle fuel poverty cross tenure. The council also plans to upscale these projects next financial year when the Chancellor has announced a further round of funding through the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor White, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Ennis, for the response. Much appreciated. Last time I asked about the number of properties that were getting loft and cavity wall insulation under the Winter Watch scheme. It was unfortunately quite small. So really pleased to hear that the council is going to be bidding for some money under the Green Homes Grant. Do you have any more detail about exactly what the council is bidding for? I noticed that the deadline for bids going in is the 1st of September for the next round, the coming round. So yeah, have you got any more detail on what the council is bidding for precisely?
Councillor Ennis?
I haven't, to be honest with you. I won't make it up because that makes us look stupid. I can find out, and I can also get you a briefing if you want with the private sector housing team for you to ask these questions to officers directly, because I think that's important that all councillors, no matter what positions, should be able to be open to briefings about subjects that they find interesting. So I can get that for you. Certainly try and get the figures, but I would not be able to tell you that offhand.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor White loves a briefing, so I'm sure he'll take you up on the offer. Question 2 is Councillor White again, this time to the lead councillor for Strategic Environment Planning and Transport. Over to you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. This one is on the Wokingham Road pay and display scheme by the shops. Green councillors have supported pay and display in the Wokingham Road local shopping area opposite Alfred Sutton School only if it has a free initial period. We believe that this would help tackle some of the parking problems in the area. Can the lead councillor confirm what the council's plans are for pay and display in this area, when it will be going live, and if there will be an initial free period?
Councillor Page.
I thank Councillor White for his question. The proposal to introduce pay and display at the Wokingham Road local shops was advertised and objections considered at the March 2018 meeting of the Traffic Management Subcommittee. At that time, it was agreed by all members of the subcommittee to implement the plans as advertised without a free period, and consequently, the equipment ordered and installed does not allow for a free period and will have to be reconfigured. However, since then, I have asked officers to re-evaluate the proposals and reconsider the tariff, not only here in the Wokingham Road local area, but also along the Oxford Road corridor and the implications for other local centres. Officers commenced work which has not yet been completed, due in part to supporting our response to COVID and other demands on officer time, such as the active travel funding. I am keen to see a different offer, either in tariff or a free period. As the scheme was previously approved, it will need agreement by Traffic Management Sub for any change and the subsequent re-advertising of any changes. As we start to emerge from the COVID restrictions, the Council wishes to ensure support for the economic vitality of our local centres, and a report will be presented to Traffic Management later this year. Only once Traffic Management Subcommittee has discussed this again, and if necessary agreed any changes to the charging structure, will the pay and display be introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Chair. Only to ask Councillor Page which Traffic Management Committee he thinks it might go to. Will it be September, or is it November is the next one maybe?
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Page?
Having seen the draft agenda for September, I can tell him it will definitely not be coming to September, so I would very much hope that item and report will come to the November Traffic Management Sub.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Right, takes us to the end then of councillor questions. Moves us on to item 8, decision book reports. A report for noting, listing those decision books published since the previous meeting of the committee. I haven't received any prior notification to speak. Nobody has indicated in the chat. So let's then confirm that the report is noted, if I may, and progress us on to item 9, which is the coronavirus pandemic delegations for local lockdowns, outlining new powers which have been given to councils and updating our scheme of delegations. Now, Mike Graham, the monitoring officer, will be introducing this report, and if any councillor wishes to speak, please do indicate in the chat. But over to Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. This report outlines the new powers which have been given to councils to assist with their response to the pandemic. The new regulations grant local authorities powers to respond to a serious and imminent threat to public health and to prevent COVID-19 transmission where this is necessary. The implementation of measures should be proportionate to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus in our area. The report explains the powers granted by the new regulations and makes delegations for their effective operation. In addition to the delegations, the report sets out the approach for wider consultation with relevant lead councillors where the powers have a wider community impact. The new powers are listed in section 4.1 of the report and provide details of the officers to be granted the relevant delegated authority. The Director of Public Health has been consulted about the operation of these powers across Berkshire, as have our neighbouring local authorities. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Obviously, lots of very important new powers. Good to have it properly mapped out where these will be delegated to. Very confident that we'd be able to make quick decisions where this is required, and I'm also confident that members will be properly consulted, and of course the Outbreak Engagement Board would have an important role in providing democratic oversight in terms of any response that is required from this council in the tackling of the COVID pandemic. I'd had prior indications from Councillor Hoskin and from Councillor Devine, so if I go to Councillor Hoskin first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just very briefly to say, I mean, I welcome this report. It's quite, whilst it's a dry report about delegations, obviously incredibly important in terms of how we in Reading might respond to local spikes of infection, the COVID-19 infection in the area. And I think this does strike the balance that you were talking about, Jason, or Councillor Brock, I should say, in terms of the ability to react quickly, but also to have the important democratic oversight. And I think it's also important to remind people that we are setting up the Outbreak Engagement Board, which will provide that public-facing accountability, also public-facing engagement in terms of the actions we're taking. So yeah, I welcome this report. Dry and yet incredibly important in terms of how we deal with the pandemic. Thank you.
There's never anything dry about a scheme of delegations, Councillor Hoskin. Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I fully support the delegating of powers to officers, but I would like an update on any enforcement activities to be reported. And I wasn't sure whether that should go to the Policy Committee or the Outbreak Engagement Board, because it's not actually necessarily an outbreak that we might be dealing with. It could be just a street party or whatever. I am concerned at what we see happening up and down the country with people who should know an awful lot better, organising raves and parties which put many innocent people at risk of catching coronavirus, from selfish idiots who just want a good time at a party and do not consider the dangers of the pandemic to others. And I would like to see Reading clamp down hard on any such parties being organised in our town, and I would expect officers and police to act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. I'm sure it's not too difficult for officers to provide an update of when the particular regulations are utilised, and this can be reported in various ways. I think the appropriate forum for any such delegations to be discussed subsequently would be the Outbreak Engagement Board rather than Policy Committee. But really, I'm perhaps answering questions that I should pass back to the Assistant Director, actually. So having not got any further indications from members, Mr. Graham, is there anything you wanted to add or respond to?
There's nothing further to add, really, Chair. I do agree. I think the Outbreak Engagement Board would be a suitable formal place for which any use of these delegations and powers should be reported through, so that we can perform that appropriate level of scrutiny which is envisaged by the guidance which brought that board into being. Informally, of course, I would expect that if there is any use of these delegations in the borough and we are closing premises or preventing parties or such like, then councillors would be fully informed through normal sort of informal channels and email and communications and press releases, etc., to make sure that they were aware of what was happening in the town. But formally, then that sort of level of scrutiny about, you know, what the effect has been and whether the powers have been successfully deployed should be through the Outbreak Engagement Board.
Thank you, Assistant Director. It seems to me that most of the regulations outlined in paragraph 4.1 are exactly the kind of things that, if utilised, would be of public interest and would be known publicly as well as within the confines of the council. Indeed, you know, where we use similar regulations in relation to public health already or health and safety, we often advertise these things by press release, for example. So, but we'll make sure, Councillor Devine, and indeed all councillors, that everybody's kept up to speed on what's happening. And of course, the Outbreak Engagement Board will be the formal place for discussing matters. So with no further indications, I shall move to the roll call vote. And I'll ask you all individually to indicate how you're voting and call you alphabetically. So we begin with Councillor Devine.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Hoskin.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
And Councillor White.
For.
Thank you, councillors. I'm for the recommendations and they are approved unanimously then, which moves us on to item 10, Greenwich Leisure Limited financial support. So this report sets out a recommendation to provide financial support to GLL following a request for assistance from the council relating to the impact of COVID-19. So I have Peter Robinson to introduce this report. I've had prior indications from councillors Hoskin and Devine, so I shall call those members first after Mr. Robinson has had an opportunity to introduce matters.
Thank you. So the Rivermead Leisure Centre is our largest centre. It's operated by GLL, Greenwich Leisure Limited. Through the lockdown period, clearly it had to shut, which meant it had lots of fixed costs and no income. It's opened on the 25th of July, but based on social distancing, it's had limited access to the members of the public, which limited the level of its income. In terms of the terms of the contract, GLL could have terminated the contract if it lost its income for more than a 3-month period, which was the case. So we've been in discussions with GLL since lockdown in terms of providing them financial support to reopen. Some authorities will have given them support right from the outset. We didn't do that. We've agreed a fee for them once we've agreed their opening, and they've subsequently opened on the 25th of July when government removed restrictions on leisure centres. The arrangement we've come to, which is set out in the report in paragraph 4.4, is the amount is capped, so the most the authority will pay for the rest of this financial year, which covers the lockdown period, which up to from March or mid-March when lockdown commenced to 25th of July, 254,000. The remaining amount of 410,000 will be paid in instalments to the end of the financial year in arrears, but that is the most the authority will pay. It's a capped figure. If it costs GLL less to run the centre in this period, then there's a cost or a benefit sharing agreement with the authority. So we will receive a proportion of the reduction in costs, and so will GLL. So just to give you an example, in terms of lost income, GLL, because of social distancing, are only able to run 1,000 swimming lessons a week now, which compares to 1,400, and because again of social distancing, that they are not able to open the leisure pool. So the options presented in the report were we didn't provide financial support at all, and that would have presented a risk to the council of GLL terminating the contract, which would have meant we potentially could have had to bring the council up the services back in-house, which would have involved additional costs in terms of setting up new systems, 2P transfer, additional staffing costs, novation of third-party contracts, risks around income as well. So the 410,000 gives us certainty and makes sure the centre is open, which it did, and I understand it's going very well a few weeks ago. So happy to answer any member questions.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Prior indication from Councillor Hoskin and Councillor Devine, as I've already said. Councillor White has indicated as well. So if I go to Councillor Hoskin first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm actually quite angry in lots of ways around the sort of government reneging on its promise to support councils, the additional costs that we are bearing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And these costs affecting the leisure sector are being felt right across the country. UK Active, the industry sector representative body, estimates that half of leisure centres in England could close without support from the government. And of course, us providing this financial support, which I would consider, and I will argue, as a pragmatic decision in order to ensure that Rivermead continues in place and is open for Reading residents. This pragmatic decision, this payment we're having to make, is of course one of those costs that the government are reneging on supporting. Councils across the country are making similar decisions. And in fact, just a couple of days ago, Bracknell revealed its financial support for its leisure services to its provider, which is in the region of up to £200.5 million for more leisure centres. But so you get an idea of the substantial amounts of money that some councils are facing in terms of ensuring the continuation of leisure services. In terms of the, I'd like to thank council officers in terms of the negotiation on this deal. I think it's a good one for a number of reasons, in the sense that it places the payments of money in instalments, and therefore any issues in terms of working with GLL over the coming financial year, there's an instalment period, so we're not paying in arrears. We are paying in arrears and instalments. The other important matter to remember is it's a capped cost, which I think Mr. Robinson has described, and I think that's really important for consideration. And I think also it is relevant. So this has been called some things in. I think it's important to remember that we're talking about a charitable trust, a cooperative. We're not talking about providing financial support to shareholders who are seeking to make a profit out of the leisure industry in this town. This is about supporting a charitable trust which we're working in partnership in order to deliver a really important leisure centre, and one that we hope to work with for many years to come. And I think that's really relevant to this decision. You've got the options there before us, but as far as I'm concerned, the option of letting Rivermead close, not providing the support and some of the real substantial costs that could accrue to the council in the short term, either through not reopening Rivermead or through the additional costs of the transfer that Mr. Robinson talked about, would also be a risk that I do not believe we should take. Some people have been speaking to the media about the fact that we should be spending this money on other things, on outdoor sports. But as far as we're concerned, as Reading Council, we're absolutely committed to our leisure centres, to swimming pools. We've got ambitious plans, and this support is a pragmatic. This supports pragmatic decision to ensure that Rivermead remains open for the coming financial year, and is also a demonstration of our commitment to leisure services and our commitment to improve leisure services into the future. Thank you.
And Councillor Hoskin. Next, I had Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support the GLL financially, with a cap in place that may maybe limit the spending, certainly the initial spending through the next few months. And I won't bother you with my opinions on the usefulness of PFI and similar outsourcing contracts, dealing with long-term contracts of over 25 years. But I do worry that this is not the last we have heard of this, and I fully expect GLL to come back at some point and ask for a further support in 2021. And although we have a paper, the next paper explains about the PCA and avoiding a major delay in the planning application, I wonder how we are going to progress the build when it comes to actually putting bricks and mortar in place. And I only hope that GLL managed to stay afloat as a going concern, because I'm not convinced actually that, because all their business is with local councils, it appears, that they are going to have to come back at some point and ask for more and more money. And I don't know whether at that point the cap is actually going to protect us. So that's my worry about future years.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. I think worth saying that neither the current contract with GLL nor the proposed future contract are a PFI. I mean, that's a matter of fact, but I understand your comments. Next, I had Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind councillors, it's now come up to 4 years since Arthur Hill swimming pool was closed. We still have no public swimming pool in East Reading. My Green Party colleagues and I are concerned about the eye-watering amount of money, almost £500,000, that Labour councillors are proposing spending on propping up an organisation which is in financial difficulties in a sector that may never recover in its current form. If Greenwich Leisure were to go bust, this money would be gone. I'm also sceptical about the very ambitious timescales given by Greenwich Leisure for leisure centres being financially viable again in the other report. This is the timescale that the financial support is based on, making me question whether we will be back here, as Councillor Devine says, at some point early next year with a similar request for more money. In order to decide on whether the proposal is a good way to spend £410,000 or not, we need to be able to compare different options. Running leisure in-house and setting up a new trust are both mentioned in the report as alternatives. From talking to officers, I understand that the council is still doing some work on what the updated costs of the council setting up a trust would be, and until we have those numbers, we can't do a proper comparison. So I think it would be sensible to defer making a decision until we have this extra information. If Labour councillors want to press ahead and make a decision this evening, I will be voting against the recommended action.
Thank you, Councillor White. Your sort of financial bizarrity never ceases to amaze me, that you can refer to 410,000 as eye-watering, but in February you brought a back-of-the-envelope budget amendment that would have increased the budget by over £1 million, with little more than a make consequential amendments to revenue and capital budgets arising from the above amendment. So I shan't listen to you on financial prudence and probity. Moving on then to Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with that. I don't think we have the luxury of deferring a decision of this nature, and clearly Greenwich Leisure need to know what they're up to here. My thoughts are on, I think the idea is that it's predicated on assuming close to normal revenue by early next year. Two parts of the question is, one, are we seeing a return of the users back to the centre at a reasonable rate, and is that sort of basically going to increase to the point where it's back to normal levels by, I think, January, February time? And I suppose the second part of the question, if it's not, and if the usage rate is substantially lower than we had forecast or had hoped for, then what happens? At what point do we have to make a further decision about subsidising or alternatives?
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Hoskin, you wanted to come back and sum up before I go back to the Assistant Director for any comments he has.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of Councillor Devine's comments, they're important ones in terms of the uncertainty that the leisure industry, the leisure sector faces. And what I would say is that we're very much taking this as a pragmatic decision in order to protect services and the uncertainty of not providing this support in terms of what might happen to Rivermead. As actually Councillor White alluded to, I have asked council officers to look at all our options. It is actually, we have a preference in Reading for providing services in-house. We've taken decisions to enter into partnership with GLL because of value for money, their expertise that they bring, and our ability to deliver on very ambitious proposals. And that was similar to the decisions that were taken around Rivermead a number of years ago. We will always, what this proposal does, it allows us the flexibility to always be making the right decision at the right point, and we will always do that. We will always look at what is the right thing to maintain services at the best value for money for residents, and I hope this report says so, which brings me on to Councillor White's view, which is actually really quite reckless. He would have us basically close Rivermead down, all the potential costs that could then accrue to this council, either in terms of trying to pick up the pieces around that and trying to set up a running of that service. And all, whether that would be affordable, in terms of the provision. So, Councillor White, you would literally be voting to close Rivermead down to residents, and I think that would be entirely reckless. You make a good point in terms of it is always important that we balance our various options and make the correct decision in terms of the cost, which is why we are looking at both. In this case, we look at our options at the end of the period in terms of this support. Councillor Stevens suggests that there's some ambitious assumptions in terms of what will be happening to the leisure industry by the spring of next year. And the fact of the matter is, we really don't know. But this support is about this current period in time. And it's also important to remember we have an open book accounts approach where we will be able to understand the losses and the costs that GLL are suffering, and that will be our contribution. We make decisions in the future when the future comes. So yeah, surprised that Councillor White is seeking to close Rivermead, and disappointed with that, but I feel that we have a majority here to make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. Back over then to Mr. Robinson, the Assistant Director. Any further comments you had? I should have said earlier, really, thanks to yourself, Mr. Robinson, and indeed to Donna Pentelow, the Assistant Director for Culture, for the work you've put in negotiating this agreement with GLL. But back to you, Assistant Director.
Yeah, just briefly, there's been a few comments about if GLL come back in terms of further support. Of course, anybody can ask for further support, which GLL could have asked even before this period, but we have got a contract for them. As we've said, we felt we had little choice in terms of negotiating because of the force majeure clause in the contract, but the contract we have with GLL is a zero cost, with GLL taking the risk, so we can enforce that contract, because that's assuming, of course, there's not another lockdown or a second wave of coronavirus, which of course we don't know. But considering if things remain as they are, my view is we can enforce the contract going forward up to the period it ends in December 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director. So with no further indications, I'll move us to the vote on the officer recommendation. As usual, alphabetical order, and please indicate your vote when I call your name. Councillor Devine.
For.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Hoskin.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Stanford-Beale.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
Councillor White.
Against.
Thank you, councillors. I'm for the recommendations and can confirm that they are approved. Moving us on then to agenda item 11, GLL Planning Costs Agreement, a report seeking permission to enter into a planning costs agreement with Greenwich Leisure Limited to meet a revised timetable for the construction of new leisure facilities at Rivermead and Palmer Park. I've had prior indication from Councillor Hoskin and Councillor White, but firstly, over to Donna Pentelow, the Assistant Director of Culture, to introduce the report. Over to you, Ms. Pentelow.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks agreement to enter into a planning costs agreement with Greenwich Leisure Limited to meet the revised timetable to build new leisure facilities at Rivermead and Palmer Park. On 20th of January 2020, Policy Committee agreed to award a 25-year design, build, operate and maintain, known as DBOM, contract to GLL, which included the building of new facilities at Rivermead and Palmer Park. Contractual discussions were progressing, but disrupted by COVID-19 and the temporary closure of all leisure facilities, which has resulted in the delay of signing the DBOM contract. In the interim, we are seeking to enter into a PCA with GLL to progress the design and planning approval for the two new facilities in a revised timetable. PCA secures the Council access to the information and the designs produced by GLL to date and brings forward work that would have otherwise been completed within the DBOM contract. The PCA becomes particularly relevant if the DBOM contract with GLL should not progress for any reason. The PCA enables the design work to continue, which in turn reduces the risk within the DBOM contract by reducing the impact of the current delay on the programme. The options appraisal in the report considers two alternative options, both of which risk potential additional inflation costs in the overall contract and results in delays to the construction start dates. Therefore, option 3, as set out in the report, is recommended as it has less risk for construction inflationary rises, and the new facilities are opened as early as possible to the original timeframes, which is September 2022 for Palmer Park and January 2023 for Rivermead. Thank you. Happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Just to say initially, I think entirely sensible, prudent for us to not be seeking to sign a DBOM contract at this very moment in time for the reasons that have already been outlined earlier this evening. But also very important that we continue work developing the new leisure facilities, and I think this PCA is the best way for us to do that and comes with some advantages as well. Councillor Hoskin, first of all then.
Thank you, Chair. And I was about to say exactly the same as what you have in terms of, I think this is a very sensible proposal in order to be able to progress our plans for the new leisure centre at Rivermead and the new swimming pool in Reading East in Palmer Park, whilst also protecting the council's interests and maintaining the flexibility due to the uncertain times and the challenges that the leisure sector faces. I think it's probably worth highlighting one thing that's quite important is that we're talking about outline planning permission. So a question may occur, which is we don't know, the form. There may be, what we were proposing in February may change in the post COVID world. We discussed this with council officers who've assured us that the flexibility within an outline planning permission means that actually this work would be absolutely valid to our proposals. But more broadly, I think what this is, it really demonstrates our commitment to push forward and to deliver on those ambitious proposals in very difficult circumstances. We discussed the difficult world that the leisure sector is under at the moment, and therefore finding a way through in order to maintain momentum, maintain work towards the delivery of the new swimming pools for Reading is really important to us. It's one of the highest priorities that we have as a council, as my councillor colleagues, and finding a way through has been really important. I think this does that. So I do recommend this option to the Policy Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I was disappointed that Councillor Hoskin chose to put words into my mouth on the last agenda item. Just to repeat, what I asked for was a deferral. On this agenda item, my Green Party colleagues and I are again concerned about the second eye-watering amount of money, almost £1 million, that the Labour administration is proposing spending on plans for new swimming pools and leisure centres. I can see why Greenwich Leisure think it is a good idea for Reading Council to give it £816,000 in addition to the £410,000 in the previous agenda item, but it isn't clear that this is in the interests of Reading residents. It isn't obvious to me that leisure will be returning to business as usual with the same space requirements and business model as was viable before, and on the sort of highly ambitious timescale that other people have mentioned. Greenwich Leisure are saying that the pre-COVID-19 plans will work either in socially distanced times or normal times, but I find this a little too convenient as well. I think the council should pause to see how things develop before committing almost £1 million to developing plans which might be out of date before they are ever built. I will be voting against the recommended action.
Oh, Councillor White, your inconsistency is so delightful. Earlier, I think you were moaning about how new leisure centres were taking too long, and now you say we need to pause a little bit more, add some delay to the delay. I'll remember as well that the next time you bring forward an ill thought through budget amendment that you've described now, £1 million as eye-watering as well.
Maybe you could reopen Arthur Hill swimming pool, Councillor Brock, which is just
full well the reasons we can't reopen Arthur Hill, but I'm delighted, Councillor White, that it is going to become key worker housing. Very pleased that the planning application for that has gone live this week. Councillor Stevens.
Just in response to what Councillor White was saying, I think his point is fair in terms of there's an uncertainty about where things will be post-COVID. But it strikes me that, if anything, all the expectations are that people have more flexible lives. They'll be working at home more. They'll be having more time for leisure. And if anything, I'd think that less time commuting up to London, say. And so I would have thought the expectation is reasonable that at some point we'll resume normal sort of leisure activities. And if anything, it will probably be increased, not diminished.
Councillor Stevens, I think it's also good, of course, that we appreciate that the leisure market may look slightly different in the future. And of course, by pursuing a planning cost agreement rather than the full DBOM contract at this stage, we allow ourselves greater flexibility in the future. Councillor Hoskin, you wanted to come back.
Thank you, Chair. You just said the point I was going to make about the flexibility of what we're proceeding, but I'd also actually like to completely disagree with you, Councillor Brock, in that Councillor White is incredibly consistent. In fact, he's voted against new pool for Palmer Park and Reading East on every single occasion. I think that we've had that come to any committee that he's been a member of. I can't think of any point where he's actually made a positive contribution in terms of the delivery of leisure facilities, modern leisure facilities for Reading East. So it's entirely consistent that Councillor White would vote against it, and I'm not at all surprised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin.
Councillor Hoskin.
Councillor White, you need to indicate if you wish to speak. Do you not?
Can I
I'll go back. Do you wish to indicate to speak, Councillor White?
Oh yeah, yes, please.
Oh, then please go forward.
I was just going to remind Councillor Hoskin about the plans to reopen Arthur Hill swimming pool and modernise it. And is Arthur Hill swimming pool not in Reading East? Would that have not have been a modern facility for swimming that we already have and could have been open long ago, rather than the sort of year upon year upon year of no swimming, no public swimming pool in Reading East?
Councillor White, Councillor Hoskin said very clearly that you've always voted against a new leisure facility, a new modern leisure facility in Reading East. And it's very important that we follow proper procedure in our committees. It is, after all, the constitution and the standing order of the council that separates us from the beasts. Now, back over to the Assistant Director. Ms. Pentelow, anything you wish to respond to or sum up?
Just picking up on the water space, really. So just referring back to the committee report we brought in January, which outlined that there is a real need still for water space in Reading, given the condition of Reading's pools. This PCA enables us to continue with the development of these two new facilities, which include the two new pools, and that the cost of the PCA is deducted from the overall DBOM contract sum by the exact same amount.
Thank you for that very important clarification, Assistant Director. Moves us on then to the vote on the Office of Recommendation, alphabetical order as usual. Councillor Devine.
For.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis. For. Councillor Hoskin.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
And Councillor White.
Against.
Thank you, councillors. I'm for the recommendations and can confirm that they are approved. Moving us on then to item 12, contract award for external and communal maintenance 2020 to 2027. So I've had prior indication from Councillor Ennis, but first I go to Nick Burston to introduce the report. Over to you, Mr. Burston.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks policy committee approval for delegated authority to be given to the Director of Economic Growth and Neighbourhood Services in consultation with the lead councillor for housing to award a works contract for external maintenance and communal maintenance over the next 5 years with an option to extend for a further 2. The current process is to tender this work for each of the areas every year. The proposed change will significantly streamline this process and should allow a much earlier commencement of work on site to make better use of the good summer weather. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burston. Over to Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Burston, for introducing that. Thoroughly support and recommend action 2.1 for the attending of external communal repairs. I think it's important to state, which I think this should be quite straightforward and hope that councillors can support this. I think it's important to state that Reading are very ambitious in its building of council homes, zero contract, efficient, best standard council homes using the HRA, but equally of importance and equally of a priority is to maintain and upkeep the current stock that we have, that we're proud of, and to ensure that tenants are getting value for money for their rents. And we believe this report certainly would go a long way into achieving that by re-tendering the works and being as cost-effective means of delivering improvements. Tenants want to see ones that I've spoken to want to see council homes being built, but they also want to see their areas being redecorated and looking better. And this would help us maintain our best landlord in Reading, which I firmly believe we are in our council homes. Councillor White thinks so too, when he talks of the private sector needing more insulation, because he knows that in the council stock there's work ongoing all the time, and this would certainly help it in the long term. And I just want to bring the attention of 5.2, the contract scale and term will have a wide range of environmental and climate change implications. The importance it attaches to the considerations, and also 8.2 and 8.3 as well. So when councillors reading this, it'd be worth it them looking at that when they consider this report. And also I want to highlight the successful tenderers in 8.3 would be expected to provide opportunities for local people and young people in particular, which may include employment, apprenticeships, training and work experience. I think Reading Borough Council Housing have got a good record on employing young local people, and it would be great for us to maintain that and improve it further. So very much support this report and support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Many important points. I mean, absolutely important that we maintain our status as the best landlord in Reading, and that's how we set an example to the private sector. And I think your points about the benefits to the local economy via kind of creating additional jobs locally and upskilling people, also vital, especially at the current time. No other councillor indications to speak. So, Mr. Burston, anything further you wish to add?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In which case we go to the vote on the officer recommendations, alphabetical order as always. Councillor Devine.
For.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
Did you get me?
No, I didn't get you, Councillor Ennis.
Absolutely 4.
Very good, very good. Councillor Hoskin.
Oh, attention then. Yes, 4.
Councillor Page.
4.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
4.
Councillor Stevens.
4.
Councillor Terry.
4.
And Councillor White.
4.
Fantastic. Thank you, councillors. I'm 4, so approved unanimously. Taking us to item 13, the 2020-21 Q1 Performance and Monitoring Report. Prior indication from Councillor Emberson and Councillor Terry. But first, in fact, I'm confusing myself because I can't remember who's supposed to be introducing this. Stuart Donnelly, I think.
Yeah,
so over to Stuart Donnelly to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is essentially in 2 parts. The first part sets out the projected revenue and capital outturn positions for 2021 for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account as at the end of June 2020. The second part reports on the performance against the corporate plan measures. So I'm going to assume everyone's read the report. I'm just going to go through some of the key highlights. So we're currently forecasting a net overspend of £3.7 million on the Council's General Revenue Fund budget. This includes all forecast pressures relating to COVID-19, and those are offset by various government funding that we've received or estimate that we're going to receive, namely £9.775 million of general support funding, £837,000 in respect of an estimated furlough grant claim, and an estimated £6 million in respect of income compensation. The income compensation scheme was announced in early July, and central government will compensate local authorities for 75% of qualifying income losses over and above 5% of 2021 income budgets for 2021 financial year only. That £6 million is our current estimate based on the previously published principles. The guidance was published earlier this evening. We need to work that through. That estimate is also subject to fluctuations in the level of income losses the council experiences. The overall position is based on projections for the year as at the end of June. That's very early in the year. There's lots of uncertainty, particularly regarding the economy and any potential second wave of coronavirus, so they are subject to change. Brighter Futures for Children are assuming the council will reimburse them for their COVID pressures. Those pressures are included in the £3.7 million projection. In terms of performance, a number of measures are impacted by COVID-19. For example, collection rates in respect of business rates and council tax. And we've also seen a rise in the number of cases, looked after children cases, and the impact of that is reflected in the financial forecasts discussed earlier in the paper. The recommendations ask that Policy Committee note the forecast outturn positions in respect of capital and revenue for both the General Fund and HRA, and also the performance achieved against the corporate plan success measures. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. So over then to Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. The Financial Planning and Strategy Manager set out a comprehensive overview with regards to our current budget position. I think it's really important to reflect on the financial impact of COVID, and the report sets out the total cost pressure to the council, and members will of course note the mitigation through the central government funding with the current projected remaining pressure of £5.87 million. The report notes that overspends across service budgets, as well as the cost saving projects that are at risk owing to those COVID-19 pressures. I think it's also important to note that the report refers at 1.6 to an estimated £6 million from the government in relation to income compensation. I think it's really important that the government comes forward with their guidance at their earliest opportunity, because not only Q1 this year will be affected by COVID, but future budgets, and it's really important that we have that clarity about our financial position. I can speak with candour when I say that as a result of the hard work of this authority over the past few years, we are in a better position than many other local authorities, and this policy committee has noted that previously. Just last week, the Institute of Fiscal Studies reported that councils face a budget black hole of £2 billion this year due to unfunded costs because of coronavirus. And I think colleagues will know that some councils have had to revise their budgets, and we're not in that position. One district council in the South East relied on nearly half of their general fund reserves. Clearly, COVID has presented an unprecedented challenge financially for the council, and given the efforts of officers at this council to get to the position we're in, with those reserves to call upon if needed, it would be extremely unfair if the government did not keep to their commitment to ensure sustainability of council finances. Moving on, I'd like to mention one of the performance indicators, in particular one area where staff has gone above and beyond to represent residents in the interest of the council. On page 55, members will note the collection of council tax, and whilst we're slightly behind last year, the proactive approach from the team means that the collection rate hasn't been as hard hit as it could have been, and we are performing well compared to other local authorities by getting in touch with residents and setting up payments that are affordable for them and making sure that they're not struggling because of the situation they might be in as well. So I'd like to thank the Revs and Benefits team for their proactive approach with residents. And as ever, I'd like to thank those in finance for continuing to monitor the budget in such a prudent manner to enable the comprehensive reporting we've seen tonight. And I'd like to thank those across the council who continue to work day in, day out on the front line for the COVID response.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Over then to Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Councillor Brock. Yes, I also just want to note that our budget position does look somewhat healthier this year than some might think. However, you know, we know that the 6 million is at risk and there are still a lot of unknowns, and in particular, just drawing policy committee members' attention to 4.28 of the report, which reports on the brighter futures for children. The COVID expenses are the COVID expenses, but I'm particularly concerned that what we will see in September is, I hope, a safe and successful return of all children to school. But our professionals are concerned that that does mean that for the first time in a long time, we may see that there are some safeguarding issues relating to children who have not been seen, certainly for a while during lockdown, those that are not already known to social care. And this does risk that we will see an increase in children who may have to come into care. I know that Brighter Future staff are working very hard to make sure that that isn't the case, but clearly if a child is in danger or risk at all, then we have to act. So there is a risk in our budget. I hope it will not come to that, but I think it's important just to flag up to committee that that is an area that I am concerned about at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Terry. Very important point. Next, I have Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. Very much support the comments from both Councillor Emberson and Terry. I mean, I think that's what has been impressive in Reading, how the local authority has responded and stepped up, and also everybody's credit for that. Slight sort of riposte also to Councillor Hoskin earlier, who said the government hadn't supported councils, and I think what's so impressive is the speed with which central government did make money available. I think the initial concern was that we had a gaping hole, and that how we were going to fill it. And I was very impressed with the speed which central government, I think by these numbers, almost 60 million have been forwarded to us. And I think that's the right thing to have done. It's kept councils like Reading sort of viable and liquid, but don't underestimate also the cost of the national debt, which I think is now over 2 trillion. So we will have to see how that pans out, but certainly combination, I think, of national support and local speed and sort of flexibility has really got us through this. So well done to all involved.
And Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Actually, fair play to Councillor Stevens for, in fact, talking about the bigger picture, because I was going to raise that. I think we have to identify today that this council, like many others, like most councils, if not all councils, are faced with massive challenges, as is the government of the day. No more, no less on homelessness. And if you look at 4.11 on the report, you can see that the overspend there is, let me get to it in this dark days, is 2.1 over million overspend, and this is primarily on homelessness. And I think as a council we should be unapologetic and proud to have accommodated over a high of 140 people. In fact, I thought it was higher than that. I thought it was near 160, the figures that I've seen, but we'll go with the report of 140 people who have identified homeless. That's over and above the 25 that are rough sleeping. These are young people and people who are struggling and sofa surfing, and the council have housed them and accommodated them. But the fact is that this is unsustainable, and we are making every effort to ensure that we can permanently eradicate homelessness in Reading. It's a major challenge because we know what's going to happen, and the government have delayed the start of evictions, but ultimately that will end, and homelessness will risk of increasing with people being evicted for non-payment of rent due to loss of work or loss of income. So homelessness is something that is going to be with us if we don't try and act together. We have to. The difference is between what Councillor Stevens said is this council has to balance the budget. Now, when I was in opposition for a year, I enjoyed having a go at the administration about what are they doing about this, making that cuts. But the fact is that every single political party in this country who are running a council have to balance the budget. We have no choice. It is our legal requirement to do so. Unlike Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who is very popular, particularly in places like Wetherspoons. Don't know why, but his picture seems to be everywhere, giving the money away. Good for him. Took us to a debt of 2 trillion, as Councillor Stevens, a record debt. That does have to be trawled back, by the way, and as Councillor Stevens rightly said, how that's going to happen, we don't know. Councils could be put under pressure. I know Boris Johnson doesn't really want to take the money back. He wants the money to go away and for him to remain popular giving the money out. But we know that is not a realistic situation. And seeing some of the worst case scenarios, now whether they turn out worst case scenarios, 120 councils of all political persuasions will be under pressure and could go bust. Hence, that's why we have to look at this report very, very carefully and take it seriously. The fact is with housing, why I really want to speak about housing is the attempt by Reading Borough Council housing team to house people who are homeless, 140, also building the 40 units, which will come on stream soon at the back of the cattle market, which will size, a number over 40 people at risk of homelessness at massive investment. Also to start building council houses. We've just had a planning application for 46 zero carbon of the best standard council homes. Councillor White might need to have a word with his colleagues who voted against that because he thought it was a wonderful green space. I don't think he's ever been out there to see that there's garages and empty space there. He wants, green and pleasant land rather than homes for homeless people. I might want to have a word about that. And also the Arthur Hill swimming pool, which would have cost the earth to modernise, is going to be kept into key worker housing. And there's more on stream as well. And we're working with the private sector. We know we're facing a major challenge for homelessness, but what we're doing is working with others to ensure that we can at least alleviate and hopefully eradicate all chances. So this council is having a go to ensure homelessness is not a major issue. Massive challenge though, massive challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. I think, you know, it's we're following up on some of the comments you said there. I mean, we do know, of course, that in terms of the national debt, the best way to pay that down is to ensure that the economy grows. And we know that's going to be a tremendous challenge moving forward. And I hope that the government recognise that local authorities can have a very important role, and especially unitary authorities, in ensuring or helping economic growth at the local level. And any further round of austerity would be a very foolish idea indeed, and would certainly be counterproductive. And yeah, Councillor Stevens is quite right that the government has been able to distribute grants to local authorities. My concern with what they've done thus far is that the formula they have used have not been very tailored to the particular situation in which we find ourselves. Indeed, they chose to use in the first two tranches of funding formula that already existed, rather than developing one that actually reflected the costs and the challenges of COVID. Hopefully this is something that can be remedied moving forward, but very important, as Councillor Emberson has said, that the government stick to their commitments around financial support for local authorities, because you know, notwithstanding the fact that this authority has got itself into a more robust position than it was in not so many years ago, it is going to be a very, very challenging period, not just for this council, but for all councils across the country. And unitary councils and upper tier authorities in particular have a tremendously important responsibility in their areas, especially in the provision of adult and children's social care, as Councillor Terry has reminded us. And this is literally often, you know, a matter of great import to families across our town, but of course could be the consequences of underfunding of those services from central government could be very severe indeed. Mr. Donnelly, was there anything you wish to add or respond to that has been pointed out by councillors in the discussion this evening?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In which case we should move to a vote. It is a report for noting, so I'm assuming it's uncontroversial. Can I ask then, just generally, for members to agree to note this report?
Agreed.
Excellent, fantastic. Takes us to the end of our agenda this evening. I'm told that the local democracy reporter was unable to get into the meeting online, so hopefully we can get the recording up nice and quickly. Otherwise, all of that fantastic discussion and debate this evening won't be covered in the local press. And so finishing then with a lovely shot of the civic offices as ever. And thank you, councillors, and thank you to all the members of the public who are able to watch, and have a good evening.
Good evening.
Cheers.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, Councillor White.